If you could make one life-changing choice to pave the way for a happier, healthier, and longer life, what would you choose? Many might think about being fitter or stronger or wealthier, but research suggests that this might not be the best answer. In fact, counterintuitively, the best choice may not even make your list. And that is relationships, including meaningful friendships. According to the Harvard study of adult development, which is the longest and most robust longitudinal study of human life ever conducted, friendships are the elixir of life. Good relationships keep us happier and healthier, so much so that neglecting to keep in touch with people you love is at least as dangerous to your health as a pack-a-day cigarette habit, obesity, or hypertension. Yet many of us neglect the importance of friendship. We struggle to maintain deep and in-person and frequent relationships throughout the landscape of life, and the result is an epidemic of loneliness. While this may be true in our 20s and 30s, it is particularly so in our 40s and 50s and 60s as we hit what we call the midlife squeeze. So, in this episode of The Spacemakers, we're going to explore how to counter the friendship recession and how to navigate friendships in a meaningful, intentional way throughout life's many resets. Let's dive in. Hi, welcome to The Spacemakers, a podcast to help you make space for an intentional and meaningful life. If you could make one life-changing choice to pave the way for a happier, healthier, and longer life, what would that be? It's a really important question. And what's interesting is most people would say, let's work on my fitness, my health, maybe get more wealthy. But the answer is actually to invest in meaningful, lasting friendships, to invest in relationships as the elixir of life. So today we're going to talk about how to make space to invest in friendships. We're going to talk about breaking the friendship recession and talk about why it's important to invest in friendships throughout different stages of life, but how that might change in our 40s and 50s in the midlife squeeze compared to our 20s and 30s. There's a fascinating set of research studies reported by Susan Pinker, who is a social neuroscientist, and she suggested that failing to keep in touch with people who are close to you is at least as dangerous to your health as a pack-a-day cigarette habit, obesity, and hypertension. So basically, friendship is the elixir of life, and we want to talk about why we tend to ghost our friends inadvertently by simply neglecting them because we're busy. We're going to talk about how to invest in friendships and the research around friendships throughout different stages of life. And this is part of a broader, big idea, which we're covering in the Spacemakers Season 2, which is how to make space for life's inevitable resets. And we're exploring the idea that the types of habits and practices that set you up for success in your 20s and 30s often need to be rethought and even undone to succeed in your 40s, 50s, 60s, etc. That early adulthood changes and the midlife slump or the midlife squeeze requires a different set of practices and habits. And that includes friendship. Talking about friends, welcome Matt, a friend and fellow spacemaker.
Thanks, Dan. Great to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you here as well.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, so we have been thinking and talking about this for a little while, and we came across this quote by an American author, Justin Whitmell Early, that I think just best encapsulates the risk presented with losing touch with friends, and getting disconnected. And that risk, of course, is loneliness. Loneliness is the feeling of being a person who used to have friends.
You read that out to me the other day. And
Yeah.
I was like, oh, that's a ripper quote.
Yeah.
And it's so the experience that I've had and the experience that so many of my colleagues who are my age have as well. Read that out again.
Yeah, so loneliness is the feeling of being a person who used to have friends. Yeah.
So we don't want to end up there, do we?
No.
I recently read a book by Bonnie Ware, The 5 Regrets of the Dying, and she's a palliative care nurse. And she wrote an essay, and it became really popular, so she wrote a book around it and essentially wrote, what are the 5 regrets of the dying? What do people say at the end of their life that they regret? And one of the big regrets is, I wish I'd stayed more in touch with my friends. So it's the same thing, isn't it?
Yes.
That we look back at the end of our life and we realize that friendship and people who are kind of our age, who have got experience with us, particularly old friends and people who know our history, they become super important. And yet, when you're in the midlife squeeze particularly, you're super busy, you're stretched with kids, you're looking after aging parents, you're struggling with finances, and maybe health issues, the easiest people to neglect are friends,
Yes, particularly the old ones. Yeah.
particularly the older friends.
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you actually do something now, even when you're busy, even when you feel stretched, in order to future-proof the thing that will really actually extend your life and give you happiness as you get older, which is to connect with people you care about?
Yeah, like always, we want to see how the habits that you form and that lead to success in the first part of life, you're going to have to unlearn those and shift them up in order to succeed in the latter half of life. Yeah, yeah. And so we want to look at that in relation to friendship, yeah, particularly. So again, I was thinking about this idea and trying to come up with, with some idea of how to kind of best encapsulate it, like how, the shift from the first part of life to the second part of life. And it made me think of a classic early 2000s movie, right? And I want to ask, have you seen this, being a good friend of mine? Have you seen High Fidelity?
Probably, but I can't remember.
Okay, yeah. So again, like you'd remember it if you'd seen it, right? So High Fidelity.
I've watched The Sound of Music. Does that make me cool?
yeah, close, but no cigar. So High Fidelity, based on a great book. In the movie, John Cusack, the lead character, like he's describing the what he sees as like the foundation of romantic relationships, and he looks at the camera and says that the kind of almost dirty secret is it's not what you're like. It's what you like that brings people together. His point being, again, this is the perspective of the movie, people get together around common interests. That's what people actually bond over. And I think this can be slightly modified and expanded to relationships, to friendships. So we're going to argue that in the early stages of life, so early adulthood, 20s to 40s, it's really relationships are about what you like. So it's about forging common interests with other people that will bring you together. So that's like, that's the glue for relationships, for friendships.
Yeah, you find people who have similar interests, similar life stages, similar worldviews probably, and therefore you connect based on what you're like.
But then the shift, the habit that has to be learned in the midlife squeeze, so 40s, to 65, is more about what you are like or who you're like.
Yeah, who you're like.
Yeah,
so
who you're like.
Who you become.
Exactly. Yeah. So the quality of person that you are and that you bring to friendships.
So do you mean that the person you are becomes more important than the common interests?
Yeah. And not just the person you are, but I guess like the friend, the kind of friend who you are. So again, as we've already kind of talked about and hinted at, in that midlife squeeze, life is going to be probably more difficult in pretty predictable ways. So in terms of me being a friend and having friends still, like maintaining friendships, I need to be the kind of person who will look after my friends when they're finding it hard, when things are difficult for them. So again, it comes down to, character, I suppose.
Yeah, okay. And even if you don't have common interests because you've moved on after 40 years, they're into one thing, you're into the other.
Yeah, that's right.
You've got kids, they don't have kids.
Yeah.
You can still have friends, not so much because you have common interests now, but
You
because of a loyalty or a
and
connection
history.
and
history. Yeah, and history. Yeah, that's right. It moves from what you like, common interests, to who you like, what kind of person.
I like it. All right, I'll have to go back to that movie. So, Matt, last week we talked about productivity and how productivity changes as we age. And so we like to feed back on what we've done each week because productivity and learning is what you do, not just what you hear. And there's so much information out there, we just want to keep feeding back to encourage ourselves to do something, but also encourage our listeners to do something with what they hear. So the framework we talked about last week was that if you're younger, you want to say yes to as much as possible.
Yeah, take all those swings.
To swing at everything using the baseball analogy and basically build skills and learn stuff. But as you get older, let's say you hit our age, you're a professional, you're a leader, you've got lots of opportunities, you've got lots in your life, you actually need to say no to a lot of things and to be super select in your swing.
Sharpen that swing.
The activity was to do one of two things. If you're younger, you need more opportunities, you're at the start of your career, we want you to swing at something and swing at something that's challenging. And that means to say yes to something that is a stretch, something new, a new opportunity, a new responsibility. Push yourself into a position where you're doing something you're uncomfortable with in order to grow and build your productivity muscles. So what did you say yes to? And if you're older and you're more experienced, you're further along in your career and you're feeling stretched and busy for, let's say, the right reasons, well, then you need to start saying no. You need to be really intentional about eliminating or subtracting or reducing, maybe automating, delegating, but saying no to stuff in order to say yes to something that really matters. So did you Did you do something?
I did do something. So I've said no to numerous commitments over the past week, actually.
Is that why you keep ghosting my texts?
Yeah, that's why. I mean, I don't know how many times or different ways I could have said no to this podcast, but it's still. There's a lot to be said for persistence, Dan, and you exemplified that well.
Excellent.
I found it really difficult, to be honest with you, because almost all my no's involved people. So it was actually saying no to relational opportunities, which I don't find easy, because I like people and I like hanging out with people. I don't like disappointing people, and it just kind of showed to me that I think, again, like the real challenge with this approach is that you're going to end up saying no to good opportunities and things with fantastic potential.
When you say people, because we're going to talk about saying yes to people, actually, yes to friendships.
Yeah.
You're talking about a different type of no?
So not saying like no to close friends, but more like saying no to work-related type stuff, like network stuff, I guess, even like stuff that involves like acquaintances, like that kind of thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. Which actually can get in the way of having time for your greater yes, which we're going to talk about. Might be friendship, family.
Exactly, yeah. But it's not like, but like in my case, I'm not saying no to like the book publisher that's saying, Matt, we can't wait to publish your memoir. I says, oh man, look, sorry, no, you know what I mean? Or I've got this great investment opportunity for you, Matt. I'm not saying no to that kind of stuff. I'm really just saying no, again, to things that involve people.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Well, and look, I totally didn't follow the exercise because the thing I was convicted about is I needed to say yes more to close friends, which I know I'm diving into this week, but that's actually what I took away from last week's episode. I'm really good at saying no. I get so many people who say, hey, do you want to help me with this or that? And I'm always asked to speak on different things. And I often have to say no, not because I don't want to do it, but I just don't have time.
Yeah.
And it's about the greater yes. But I felt convicted that I just have to carve out space for friends. And so I was invited to a networking thing. I was invited to kind of a social gathering. I'm not big on parties normally, but I said yes to both events.
Good on you.
And they were excellent.
Great.
There were people there who I hadn't seen for ages and had some great conversations. And then one of them led to having a coffee later in the week, which was, again, catching up with an older friend. So, I said yes, but for something that I think I wanted to.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
Yes to it. It's about being intentional, which is what the whole podcast is about.
Yeah, good. I've had a few viewers like kind of chime in and ask me if you also said yes to the challenge that we gave you last week, and that was starting to watch The Bear TV series. Have you done that yet or not? It's going to be very relevant to our conversation today.
It is on my to-do list.
Okay.
It is on my to-do list. Genuinely on my to-do list.
Okay, good. Look, Dan, we don't want to pretend to be formulaic about friendships, right? Okay, so that's the first caveat. But we do want to say there are some real differences when it comes to approaching friendship between, again, early adulthood, 20s to 40s, and then the classic midlife squeeze, the 40s to 60s. Yeah. Now, with earlier adulthood, you're surrounded with all these awesome opportunities because usually you've got more time than later on in life. You're trying to differentiate yourself from your family of origin. You're trying to kind of like build your own identity, and you got usually like good health as well. So you got lots of energy and vitality. So you put all that together, and it's just a great time of life to go about trying a whole bunch of things, getting involved in a whole bunch of activities to make friends.
And everything's new as well.
Everything's new and novel.
It's the first time you've gone diving. It's the first time you've, gone out for drinks, and the first time you've done blah, blah, blah. So there's an energy that comes with it as well.
Yeah.
A newness.
Early adulthood wasn't the first time that I'd gone out for drinks, but sure, that's probably not a great thing, right?
Yeah, they were bad examples.
Yeah. Anyway, all this to say that you're trying to kind of establish who you are and create this identity, right? And again, so going back to our kind of big summary quote, you're working out what it is that you like, what you like. So again, great time to find that common glue with other people to build friendships.
So friendship's easy in that sense.
Yeah, it's easy in that sense. But again, research seems to suggest that you want like 3 components to make good quality friendships. And again, we're after both quantity but also quality friendships. So the three elements are, first of all, proximity. So it actually helps like big time if you are geographically close to the people who you're trying to make friends with and maintain, okay? Yeah.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. So and even if it's not geographically close in the sense of I live close to my friends, if you go to the same university, if you go to the same school,
same sporting clubs,
there's your proximity because you're there every week and you just happen to bump into the same people.
Yeah, well, that's a nice segue into the second element, which is just like unplanned / spontaneous interactions. Yeah. So again, I haven't had to put you down in my calendar or diary, like particularly, but just the way that my life is set up and your life is set up, there's a very high chance we're going to run into each other. And that's kind of cool, right? So that's also good for quality friendships. And then lastly, the third element is vulnerability. So this particularly ties into the quality friend piece. That is, if we're going to be quality friends, then I need to be able to show you like who I really am over time, and you need to be able to reciprocate. So there has to be some degree of honesty, transparency. I have to actually feel known.
Yeah, so you have shared joys, you have shared interests and shared wins, but also a certain level of shared struggle and honesty.
Yes.
So you get to know a person at a deeper level.
I don't want to be feeling like I've got to wear a mask in front of you.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, okay, that's good. So friendships of that kind of nature are going to be a whole lot of fun in the moment in your 20s or 30s. But it's not only that. They also serve this awesome preventative function. You can think about it as a kind of like almost like preventative health measure. If I go about building quality friendships with a wide range of people in my 20s to 30s, it's going to stop or at least mitigate the corrosive effects of potential loneliness further on down the track in my 40s to 60s.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like some of the best friends I have came from university, not school.
Yep.
And, I just remember we just spent a lot of time hanging out on the lawns and talking and, eating and studying. And so the point is there was that commonality. We had common interests. We had the challenge of having to study and pass exams together. And everything was new. So went hiking, went walking. And so some of those friends are people I'd still connect with.
Yes.
So that's the protective function.
Yeah. And that's a big deal. But I feel that you're about to tell me that protective function has been it's been compromised now because of online technology.
It's almost like we've had a bit of this conversation before, Matt. So both you and I were Gen X, and so it's important for us not to look back and think, well, just because we had that type of experience, that's what it's like when you're 20 nowadays. And the research seems to indicate that Gen Z has a very different experience, particularly because of the move from what John Haid calls a play-based childhood to a screen-based childhood. So essentially a youth where you're spending time hanging out in pubs and on the soccer field and hanging out at the university, talking with each other, and experience life face-to-face, compared to having broad, wide social networks online, but not a lot of in-person time. And that really changes things in terms of your experience of building deep, meaningful friendships. Certainly the research indicates that younger people feel lonelier and less connected than our generation did. And the more time you spend online, the less connected you feel because you're actually taking the time you would ordinarily have with real friends in real time in real places and exchanging them for somewhat more superficial experiences, which are wide and broad but not deep.
So it's like an opportunity cost there.
There's an opportunity cost. And again, there's a mask, like you said, because you're actually using a medium to communicate relationally, and that medium changes the message. And so it's quite different when I'm hanging out with you and having a coffee versus when I'm posting a picture of myself having coffee on Instagram and saying, what do you reckon? I think actually some of the things we're going to talk about around friendship in your 40s and 50s, which require more intentionality, more rhythm, and more of a pattern, it's probably actually relevant for Gen Z and younger now, because if you're not intentional about hanging out with people in real time, in real place, and actually having that kind of regular contact and spontaneity, it may not happen. You might turn around and realize I never had those friendships. If you're 20 to 30, you recognize the need to build broad, wide, meaningful friendships in order to have older friends when you're older. How might you go about it?
Yeah, excellent question. So C.S. Lewis, British author, academic, he went on record and said probably like the greatest pleasure in his life were friendships. So he's a good guy to listen to, like when it comes to making and keeping friends. And he wrote, friendships arise when two companions discover that they have in common some insight or interest or even taste, which till that moment each believed to be his own unique treasure or burden. The typical expression of opening friendship would be something like, what, you two? I thought I was the only one.
Yeah. Okay.
So he's really honing in there on, again, having this thing that is precious to you, almost like a treasure, some kind of interest, or area of expertise. And you think, oh, am I like kind of alone here? And you find someone else who shares that, and suddenly you've got a companion.
Yeah. Okay.
So what you like. things that you like, common interests, that he saw as again being the genesis of friendship.
All right, so you watch High Fidelity, your real friends watch High Fidelity, and then you've got something to talk about.
Yeah, or the Bear. I'm not too fussy. So
we're not sponsored by the Bear, right?
yeah, Disney FX.
You stick your sponsorships to the ones that are sponsoring us, all right?
Okay, so this means, right, in order again to have to actually discover for myself these interests, these passions, these things that I feel like that I'm really excited and enthused about, I need to create time and space in my life as a 20 to 40-year-old person to explore life, to find out what it is that I like. Yeah, and the risk, of course, particularly in that kind of 20 to 40 space, is that you may be so dedicated to your career and excelling at that so well, or studying for it so much that you squeeze out any other extra time for interests and hobbies and extracurricular activities. So you don't have the capacity to find out what it is that you like.
Probably the alternative is being so absorbed in sitting in a room with high-speed internet.
Yeah. Yes.
You actually don't launch, which we talked about.
Yes,
in the first
that's
one,
right.
Yeah.
That's
but
right.
either way, both extremes will squeeze out friendship.
That's right, because you're not exploring the world. You're not discovering what it is that you like.
Yeah.
And if you don't know what it is that you like, again, you aren't going to have this experience of finding someone to come alongside you who likes that thing as well.
Yeah.
First big principle, make time.
Yep.
Make time in your life as a 20 to 40-year-old. And second big principle, as cliche as it sounds, go first. So if I say I'm into, the Bear, or if I'm into jiu-jitsu and I'm starting to kind of sound you out as a potential friend, I'd encourage you, don't be like the proverbial wallflower. Take the risk and say, hey, Dan, have you ever seen The Bear? It's a really good show. Or, hey, Dan, have you ever thought about, you look like you're a guy who could get picked on a lot. Maybe you should start doing jiu-jitsu. You know what I mean? Because the reality...
that's too close. It's too close,
Because the reality is, most of us are waiting to be asked and approached. Most of us really appreciate it.
So be proactive in
proactive, yeah.
That's where I think you and I would say that building friendships is a skill and relationships is a skill, and you actually have to practice it. And the more you practice in-person relationships when you're young, the better you become at it when you're older. And the wider and broader your connections are when you're young, the more likely it is that you have some old friends when you're older, which is protective and predictive of a long, happy life.
Yeah, that's it.
So you want to put in the work when you're young. And the third principle we talked about is ask good questions and be curious. Because, look, I'm an introvert. I naturally, if you saw me when I was 18, I wasn't very good at connecting with people. I just didn't have the social skills that would help me meet people, let's say at a party, for example. And I remember someone actually saying to me, well, you actually just have to ask good questions and listen. And it was just super helpful. Sometimes you have to teach people how to connect with other people. And I started to do that. I started to ask some, pretty simple questions like, what do you do for a job? Or what's been the highlight of your day? Then, to start asking maybe deeper questions as a follow-up.
And maybe on that too, if I'm stuck thinking, what do I ask is my kind of opening gambit question, maybe a good place to start would be, what would I like to be asked at a party? Because there's a pretty good chance if I'm open to being asked that, the person next to me is probably up for it.
And pay attention to what other people ask. I was at a party once and someone said, what's something strange or interesting no one knows about you? And we had a ripper conversation with 3 or 4 people in that group. And so that's a question I've asked as a result of that. The other thing is to think about, if you're heading to a sports club and you've had a conversation with someone, you got along well and you think it'd probably be good to have another conversation, well, actually try to remember what you talked about and follow it up. If they said that they were having a hard time because their mum is sick, well, then ask them how their mum is. You know what I mean?
That's great.
And so I suppose the point is be attentive, be curious and ask questions.
Yeah.
Be other focused or other centered. And it's a great way to start to learn to build skills in connecting.
That's good.
There was one more principle that came out of a listener's comment. So we've got podcast at spacemakers.au. We really like hearing what people are thinking about these episodes. And someone wrote about one of our episodes recently, it sucks to be an introvert. And they wrote it humorously, but what they were saying is they get the research that friendships, connections, and relationships are super important for long life and for happiness. But it sucks to be an introvert. And I thought about that actually, because I'm definitely an introvert. I find that, I like people, but I'm energized by being by myself. If I go to a party, I'm exhausted even though I get something out of it. But what I've realized as I thought about that comment is I don't think being an introvert means you don't extend yourself and try to build relationships. I think it just means that the way in which you build relationships might be different. like I tend to build relationships one-on-one or one-to-two rather than in big crowds. But I still think you have to stretch your introvert muscles if you want to build connections, because the research is clear that people with deep and regular relationships have a better life. So it's important to stretch yourself, to actually ask those questions, to get out and to build friendships, particularly when you're young, in order to broaden your social circles. I remember thinking after COVID, like I used to connect with people, like I used to have 20 people around for dinner every week for years and years and years. We had a big dinner. It was exhausting, but it was energizing. It was part of life. It always stretched me as an introvert, but I would also often be the one who had one-on-one conversations in that group rather than group conversations. But then COVID happened, we went into lockdown, everyone stopped connecting face-to-face for about a year, and I found that it was just super hard to get back into any type of social rhythm, and I realized that actually social connection and relationship building is just like exercise. It's a muscle, it can atrophy. And so I think being an introvert, you might have to stretch yourself a little harder to actually connect with others, but it's still really important.
And we're talking about like really quality, not quantity. Yeah. So maybe fewer friends, but really meaningful friends. And again, it's a capacity like all of us that you can work on and become fitter at.
I think we have a culture which probably defines introversion in a slightly unhealthy way. I've got some great friends who are Afghani in origin, okay? And so literally they have 15 people in the house constantly, day in, day out. Grandparents, grandmas, like different names, but kids, extended family. So if you're an introvert in a communal tribal culture, you've got people around all the time. Whereas when we talk about being an introvert, we're talking about people literally staying at home in their bedrooms and hardly seeing anyone for days on end. So that I think that definition of introvert doesn't work for anyone, and the research suggests that that's not a good way of being. So I think in our Western culture, which is individualized, where you don't have natural connections and tribe and community around us, we actually need to extend ourselves to spend more time with people.
Yeah, Dan C, making introversion great again. That's great.
Making introversion great again. I like it. Okay, so Matt, quick summary. If you're in your 20s and 30s, you want to build relationships, future-proof yourself by having broad friendships so you can have friends as you're older. What are some things you might do?
Okay, so number one, make friends around common interests, which means carving out the time and the space in your probably already busy life in order to explore what it is that you like. That's number one. Yep. Number two, be curious. Be the person who extends the invitation, who initiates conversations. And again, just notices people.
Just ask questions.
Just ask questions, And then number three, if you're an introvert, then again, stretch those social muscles. And again, just practice. Again, practice stretching yourself a little bit and at least investing in a few quality friends.
All right, so we've talked about 20s and 30s, early adulthood. Let's talk about the midlife squeeze. Recognizing that the types of things that happen in one season of life require a different form of friendship or a different type of intentionality in how to connect with friends. And I loved your quote, loneliness is a feeling of being a person who used to have friends. How do we avoid that in midlife?
Well, there's a couple of reasons, first of all, why we may be at risk of this. And the first thing, again, classic midlife squeeze. You've got pressures from perhaps ailing parents or caregivers. You've got kids who you're looking after, and you've got the huge demand of career. So your career could still be very, very demanding. What that means is that you almost find yourself busier, perhaps wealthier, but also more at risk of being lonely and not having friends. And I've heard people describe this as being stuck in a current. And of course, the killer thing about a current is that often you don't know that you're in one. You're just being pulled along until it's too late. And it's even more disconcerting and harder to pick up that you're in a current if you're in there with other people, because you're both getting pulled along in the same direction at the same time.
Yes, everyone around you has got the same unwritten ground rules. Everyone's ignoring their friends. Everyone's working hard. So it just feels
That's
normal.
right. Like you and I, both busier than when we were younger. You and I, both probably wealthier when we were younger. You and I, without even kind of maybe acknowledging it to each other, perhaps feeling a bit more lonely than we were back then.
But even with the wealth, I feel like there's a greater pressure and urgency to save for when I'm older as well. So that's the squeeze.
Again, no one chooses this, right? Because it's a current, it just becomes a default. And that's the big point. So we're not suggesting that anyone actively says, you know what, I want to start losing friends and just get busier and maybe, for the sake of making some more money. No one chooses that.
Yeah. And again, when I read the book, The 5 Regrets of the Dying, Bonnie Ware gives a story, an example. I can't remember the person's name, but someone at the end of their life, they're in palliative care, and they just simply said that they realized that they've lost all their old friends. And it wasn't that they did it intentionally. They didn't have fights. They didn't, clash. They
Yeah.
just neglected
That's
friendship
yeah.
and moved on, and,
Yes.
and they lost each other's numbers. They just realized that
Yeah.
they had no friends anymore.
Yeah, so the big takeaway there is that again, just by neglect and passivity, so just by not doing anything, the people who are probably most likely to kind of neglect in our lives will be our old friends. Because again, they're the ones who we can most often take for granted. We think they've been around for decades. If I just don't invest very much in the relationship, they're going to be around for decades still. And of course, they're the riskiest ones to lose because there's a shared history there that you can't get with new friends. There's also this phenomenon of, again, particularly in the kind of midlife squeeze, you can have what Arthur Brooks, the author, has termed deal friends as opposed to real friends.
Yeah, which is super helpful.
Yeah, it's such a good distinction, right? And and once someone points this out to you, it's like, aha, yeah, I see that.
I was in Port Douglas this week, and speaking at a big conference, I was speaking to a CEO of he's been a CEO in multiple ASIC big companies.
Yeah.
And I just mentioned the idea of deal friend versus real friend. I didn't have to explain it. He immediately knew what I meant, and he liked the term because he just said, at my level, everyone I meet is a deal friend.
Yeah.
They're lawyers, they're stakeholders, they're shareholders. There's no one in my life who is a real friend anymore. Because he's got too much power, and the people around him need stuff from him.
Yes.
And that's a real risk at certain levels, but we can all fall into that trap
Yeah.
where we spend a lot of time with work-based friends. We spend a lot of time just kind of having banter with people who are in our life because we see them every day. But then you leave your job and there's crickets. You turn around and realize, oh, what about all those other people who have been in my life, friends, family, real friends who didn't know me as a productivity consultant or an author or whatever it is. They're the people actually I shouldn't have neglected along the way.
Yeah. The other thing I'd add to that is that particularly if you reach a leadership position or seniority at work, then it's almost inevitable that people start to regard you differently, being like a boss person. Again, so there's just not much you can really do about that. So it's just being conscious. I've got these kind of friends in my life or colleagues. I need, like you said, to invest in these other real friends over here.
Yeah. And look, everyone needs different types of relationships, right? You need someone who can mentor you. So someone who's maybe a bit older and wiser or experienced that you can go to and ask questions of. You need colleagues, you need deal friends, you need people to walk alongside with and do stuff together with, and you need old friends, you need people probably as well younger than you that you're helping out. So it's just recognizing you need a breadth of relationships, but don't neglect the ones who are your peers.
Yeah. So how do we actually go about making this happen? So at the very start, we talked about, again, earlier in life, it's what you like. And then at this stage of life, it's who you like. And again, we're talking about character. What type of friend are you? And this is really, really important because at this stage in life, I'm not sure if you found this, but I certainly have. So once you get to, your 40s, you can have these old friends. And when you're in your 20s and 30s, you had so much in common. But as the decades move on, these commonalities can shift. And so when you hit your 40s, right, you can look around and say, well, they've got adult kids. My kids are still in primary school. I don't have the chance to, to watch, to go to the movies as much as they do anymore. We don't even live perhaps in the same suburb, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I used to be a physiotherapist. All my friends were physios. They're in healthcare, and now I'm a productivity consultant. So we don't have anything in common.
That's right. It changes. So if the cement and the glue of your friendships with those people was solely what you had in common interests, then you're in really dangerous waters.
Yeah.
So this is why it has to shift to what kind of person are you? What kind of friend are you? Who are you like? Are you going to be the kind of person who still invests in these people, for want of a better term, who cares for these people, who notices these people, particularly because, as we've already talked about, they could be going through a difficult time of life, or they're surely going to encounter, like we are, some difficulties. So will you be the kind of friend who attends to that?
Yeah, so you have to be willing to actually sit through people's pain, their sicknesses, their divorces, the anger, the grief,
that's
the
right.
loss.
Yeah.
And you don't get much out of that.
That's right.
But the point is, it's who you are and the loyalty you have to that relationship. And vice versa. And I think it also means you have to be more intentional because if you don't have any natural crossover points, well, then it does require that you are very deliberate in chasing people up, in creating patterns and rhythms, which we'll talk about in a minute. So that you actually have touch points and connections again. Point is to make those small everyday decisions to sacrifice what you want in order to walk alongside of the person you're with and change alongside of them together.
Look, I've got, and I'm not sure if I've told you the story, but maybe 2 or 3 years ago, right? This is just an example of a real friend, and again, someone who's an old friend. So this old friend, we haven't got a whole lot in common anymore in terms of, like, we've got some common interests. We've got loads and loads and loads of history. Like, he's probably my oldest friend. About 2 years ago, I was having a really hectic, stressed out, bad day. It was a weekend, and I had to move my wife's car, and she could have moved it so I could get out, but I was just, nah, I'm going to do it myself. So I was rushed and I was stressed. And this car happened to be an automatic, right? And so I was so rushed and so stressed, I opened the door, and instead of like being a regular normal person jumping in, shutting the door and reversing it, I decided to save time. I was going to put one foot in with the door open and leave the other foot on the ground. And it was an automatic, and it got stuck in drive, not reverse. And I couldn't hit the brake because, again, I had one foot in the car, and I literally drove through our front garden, through our neighbour's fence, and ended up in the gutter outside. Thankfully, like, there were no small children or people around. And I was just so embarrassed and felt so bad. And I thought, man, like, this is one of those moments in life where, who would you call at 3 a.m. in the morning if something was really going bad? I thought, I'm in one of these moments. And I thought of this guy, like, right away, called him, my friend, and he came round, and he, like, literally patched up the fence, so, like, strapped it back together for now, helped me clean up everything, and then, like, checked in that I was okay. And then, like, I think 2 weeks later, like, insisted on taking me out for a coffee just to kind of check in and actually make sure that I was okay.
Wow.
And so again, that's a real friend. And
Yeah,
that's
a
an old
real friend.
Yeah, and that's an old friend.
But it's hard, isn't it, to think forward. You can do it in the moment, to think forward though, and think, okay, who are the people that I would actually call, or who are the people who might call me, and how do I just not neglect them?
Yeah.
I've got a similar friendship. And I was doing an exercise from The Good Life where they ask you how many years do you have left. I'm 47. Let's say at the best I live until I'm 90. Maybe the same thing. My friend's a bit younger, but one of my close friends, let's say they live to 90 as well. I did the maths of how much time I would have left, right?
Yeah.
And I see them about an hour a month. And that's a stretch, which it shouldn't be. I used to see them every day, but now I see them about an hour a month if I average it out, okay? So it's like, let's say 12, 15 hours a year. When I multiplied it, I'm like, well, I get like 30 days with them for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
Just like nothing compared to how much I work. And they're the people you're going to call on. They're the people who statistically will make you happier and healthier as you age. They're the people as you get older that you'll rely on so you won't be lonely. I don't want to just spend 30 days with them until the end of my life. And so, that pushes me to say, okay, how do I be more intentional?
Yeah. So trying to bring all that together, the first big principle is don't neglect your old friends, which is going to require intentionality.
Being deliberate and thinking about who matters. The second principle you and I have talked about is actually locality. Which I think is a challenge for our culture. So I used to be a physiotherapist. I worked in aged care rehab for about 4 or 5 years. So I spent a lot of time with people who were just about to head into nursing homes, and I was trying to help them delay that transition and, I suppose, live independently as long as they could. I had some great conversations with people, and I often asked people about what they cared about, what they valued. But one conversation really stood out to me, and there was this elderly guy. He was super intelligent. He was super wealthy. And so he told me about how amazing his life had been. So what he had done is he had a holiday house or a house in Switzerland. He had a house in Hobart, and he used to basically just rotate 6 months of the year. And he did that for like 15 years. So he always had a summer. He got to experience the European summer, and then he got to experience, Hobart, which is where he was from. But what was interesting is when I observed his life and the people he visited, the people he would speak to, and I suppose just we tried to book a family meeting, there was no one. Like, there was no one who visited. There was no one he called. And when we had a family meeting to help work out how do we, help this person live independently, there was no one he could call on. And it just really struck me as not what I wanted.
Yeah.
You can have wealth and you can travel and you can have all those great experiences, but if you have no place, I think that was it. He had no place. He chose to live in places that were fun and great, but it led to just a bunch of deal friends rather than real friends, acquaintances rather than people he could call on. And so...
Well, it sounds like he had places, but he didn't have a home.
He didn't have a home, and maybe didn't make a home because he was always moving to the next thing. It makes me think of the vows that ancient monks used to have. They have a vow of poverty, of chastity, of obedience. But I heard someone once say that in our busy, individualized, mobile Western world, we actually need to reclaim the vow of locality. That to choose to be in one place and to choose to make decisions to stay in one place in order to be embedded in a local community, to know your neighbors, to build regular friendships is actually a sacrifice, because the current, like you described, is about pushing us out. Even the whole grey nomad thing, when you retire, what should we do? Get in a caravan and travel around Australia. But that's exactly what will separate you from old friends, unless you do it with them, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And I've really considered that. And I suppose in my life, particularly when my friend Mick died, I thought, actually, I want to take up the vow of locality, particularly because so much of my work is overseas.
Yeah.
And so many of my clients are in different places in the world. I can coach them online and on Zoom. I was having these great connections with people all around the place. But I realized that actually if I continue in that direction, I might actually stop talking to my neighbors and I might not have a place of my own.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be like this guy from Switzerland. I think that's one of the things that we might need to consider as you get older to stay put.
We, as in, like, you and I are going to end up in the same nursing home? Is that where this is going? Or no?
That's
Retirement community. It's a retirement community.
That's what I'm hoping. Although, I'm hoping, you'll be the guy who goes out and buys me takeaway Chinese so I don't have to eat that terrible food. So anyway, I think that is actually a commitment to think about where do I live and am I willing to stay in a place and not take that job promotion because I recognize the importance of friendship and place and home.
I've got a feeling C.S. Lewis also wrote something about this. Is that right?
I have a feeling.
So I believe he said something like, if I had to give a piece of advice to a young man or young person about a place to live, I think I should say sacrifice almost everything to live where you can be near your friends. Sacrifice almost everything to live where you can be near your friends.
No, look, we're not saying don't travel. We're not saying don't take up new experiences. But I think we are saying don't let money and career be the predominant or the guiding star of everything.
Yeah.
Because actually place and friendships matter. So the last principle is predictable patterns. And we've talked about this in our previous season. You're in your 40s and 50s and you recognize you just aren't connecting with people who matter. What do? And you and I both think you have to create a pattern. You've got to create an intentional, regular rhythm, which isn't spontaneous necessarily, but it'll actually get you connecting. I mean, you and I both had a friend, Daz Oldclass, and he once said that spontaneity, unlike its name suggests, needs to be planned. And I kind of laughed when I heard that the first time, but I actually think he's right. And what he's saying is, actually, you and I have busy calendars. You and I don't just spontaneously say, hey, let's go to the movies or catch up or do blah, blah, blah. It has to be planned because of the nature of our calendars. But if you create space in your calendar that is unbusy, well, then you can be spontaneous in that space.
Look, and this is a tough one for me because I really value spontaneity and I'm not naturally organised whatsoever. And so I've long lived with this ideal, a hangover from my 20s and 30s, that I could just, again, at the drop of a hat, see you and catch up, right? So I'm not saying this is easy, but I think it's wisdom, right? It's wisdom. And it's particularly suited for this season of life.
And maybe our culture as well.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
The way we live.
Yeah. So again, like giving credit where it's due, Justin Whitmell early has a lot of good stuff to say in this particular space. His big idea is don't let the ideal be the enemy of the good. So almost like something good enough. So something in terms of seeing people, scheduling something with people is better than nothing, right? So take your life and think, well, there's got to be one variation of schedule that I can make fit for my particular circumstances when it comes to seeing people. For example, you could go high frequency. So a bit like I think your example from before, you used to see this person daily. Well, maybe you can move the daily to the weekly. So maybe you can arrange to see someone on a weekly basis. Maybe that's, during the evening, catching up for a coffee. Or maybe it can be weekly in person. So you're catching up for a movie, a lunch or a meal, Or maybe a weekly lunch or dinner because everyone's got to eat. Yeah, so you just build that in weekly.
So we've done that with our neighbours, where we eat a meal, they eat a meal, so we eat every week.
Yeah, every week. Yeah. So, but weekly's pretty high frequency.
It's high frequency, it's high commitment, and it's been difficult.
Or if the weeklies is too much, then you can look at doing all those things fortnightly. So again, maybe weekly is too much, but fortnightly is doable.
Or monthly, right?
Yeah, that's right. Or monthly, yeah. So monthly for a lot of people is probably like a sweet spot. And that's still, and going back to your example, maybe that only ends up to 30 days together for the remainder of the year.
But it's more than you would have had, right?
Exactly,
and actually, like, something you said to me once is if you're in the busiest time of your life and you're really, really struggling for friendships, at least maintain a minimal viable product.
Yeah.
So if you catch up with someone once a month and it's only an hour a month, then when life does slow down a little bit, and there is a change that often happens, like when you retire, for example.
Yeah, that's it.
Well, you're not someone who turns around and says, I haven't seen this person for 20 years.
Yeah. Who are you again?
Who are you again? Now, it's not ideal, but it's building a rhythm rhythm that actually
Yes.
invests
Yeah.
in the people who you care about, and you know what they're going through. You can be there through their hard times,
Yeah.
so that you don't also turn around and say, "Oh, sorry, I wasn't there when you got
Yeah,
divorced
yeah,
at
yeah,
all."
yeah,
Do you know what I mean?
yeah,
And so
yeah, that's right.
I think monthly is an excellent rhythm. In fact, I even have a quarterly rhythm with some people. Like when we had book club, we used to meet 4 times a year because I
Yeah.
thought that was realistic. But we did it for 7 years, and
Yeah.
I still have friendships that came out of that
Yeah.
quarterly rhythm. That
Yes.
matter to me, and
Yeah.
so I think
Yeah.
any rhythm works.
Yeah, that's right. Any rhythm is demonstrating to people that you're not neglecting them. And it's also demonstrating to yourself, which I think is super important, that you're not being passive.
And the other thing that you've done and others have done is, it could be, let's say, a monthly rhythm, like a monthly dinner,
Yeah.
or a monthly meal at a pub. But what if you invited 5 of your friends?
Yeah.
And so you had this kind of commonality, this connection.
Yeah.
You get to catch up with a bunch of
Yes.
people at the same
Yeah.
time. I'm not saying it doesn't mean you shouldn't catch up with them in different forums or different kind of situations, but at least that gives you that regular catch up with people who really matter, and you can start to invest in each other's lives again. So look, we always have 30 seconds of silence. We've talked about a lot of stuff. We've talked about what it looks like to build friendships when you're young, to build wide and broad friendships, and to be intentional, to build patterns, to stay in one place when you're older, to do sacrificial things based on who you are, not what you like. So maybe pause for a minute. Is there one thing that stands out to you as a listener?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be the bear.
It doesn't have to be the
Sorry, Darren, that was for you.
Yeah, so just take a moment of silence, experience space, and think about what stood out to you from this conversation. So we've talked about friendship. We've talked about breaking the friendship recession and about being intentional in how we approach people in our lives, because it's people ultimately that we look back at the end of our life and think, it's those relationships that made me happier, that had meaning, that actually lead to longer life. So what do we do about it? We always finish with a practical activity, and you and I have wrestled long and hard with what type of activity would we give people to help them invest in friendships. And rather than actually give a prescriptive, do this once a month or do this once a fortnight, we can't really speak into your life stage, but we can help you reflect on your current friendship map and where you want to head, and that's what we want to do. So we're going to share an activity which we are wholly ripping off from The Good Life, but it was an excellent activity that you and I both found helpful, and it's based on the research. So the research from The Good Life guys, again, say that the frequency and quality of our contact with other people are the 2 major predictors of happiness. So when you look at the longitudinal research, the 2 major predictors of happiness are how regularly you see people, frequency, and the quality of those connections. So what they've done is they set out a quadrant. So imagine a quadrant, you've got a vertical axis and you've got a horizontal axis just as a cross. So you've now got 4 boxes, okay? So this is what I want you to do. Get a piece of paper and I want you to actually write a quadrant. And in the vertical axis is a quality quadrant. So at the top of the axis, you want to write energizing, and at the bottom, depleting. Meaning, who are the relationships that energize you, where you hang out with people, you feel bigger, you feel greater, you feel stronger, you feel more connected, you've enjoyed their company, you've had something worth connecting over. Depleting are those relationships that make you feel small, maybe belittled, where there's some toxicity. It doesn't mean you neglect them necessarily.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Especially if they're family and close relationships, but you at least want to recognize that they deplete you rather than energize you.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
So that's the vertical axis. The horizontal axis involves infrequent to frequent. So infrequent on the left, frequent on the right. And then, clearly you can map out who are the people who you see regularly, who are the people you see infrequently. Are they people you see regularly and energize you, or are they people you see regularly and deplete you? And similarly, are they people you see infrequently who energize you or deplete you? So it's a really helpful exercise. So you might start with obviously your family, maybe close relatives, put in your closest friends, maybe old friends, maybe new friends, but people who are kind of connected to you and who you care about. But then think a bit more broadly. Are there old friends that you simply don't see, or who you haven't connected with but who certainly energize you? Where do they fit? And is there anyone you could think of who might become a good friend but you don't see frequently or you don't know well?
So someone like with potential.
Yeah, potential friendships.
And then maybe like work colleagues and stuff as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But probably work colleagues who you think you'd like to have a friendship with, rather than work colleagues who you'll leave the office from and probably not see again.
Yeah.
So map out those names in the quadrants, and it's fascinating. So that's your current reality.
So what you're telling me is that once I've got this in front of me, it's giving me a good lay of the land of my current reality.
Yeah, so map out the lay of the land right now. So it's your current reality, and being like a productivity person, well, then we want a current state and we want a future state. So what the Good Life guys recommend is circle particular friendships that you think, look, they energize me and I would like to spend more time with those people. And then circle those names and put an arrow where you'd like them to be. And that just gives you a sense of kind of direction of movement you might need to have to invest in these friendships. And that can also be, I see someone regularly, they de-energize me. I'm not going to ghost them and take them out of my life.
Yeah.
But actually, I am going to put in some steps to maybe see them less regularly or to give them less of my best time if I need to put healthy boundaries in place. And look, the alternative might be I actually need to have some robust, hard conversations to deal with some conflict or to deal with an elephant in the room, which is what de-energizes me. It might not be the person itself, but a situation that you haven't dealt with, unforgiveness, old conflict. So it might be a stimulus to say, actually, it's time to deal with this so that this person I see regularly can be energizing again. It will take a bit of time, half an hour, I reckon, to sit down and at least put out the map. Like you can obviously think about it more deeply after that and think about what you might do with it.
Yes. Yeah.
But to actually write down the names and to think about where they're at, it doesn't actually take as long as you think. Our suggestion is to book half an hour, sometime ideally in the next week or maybe the next fortnight, put it in your calendar. Think about where you'll do it. I'd think of a cafe or go to the beach or be somewhere quiet, sit on the deck of your house with a coffee. And we also have a handout, all of our activities and our practical exercises and a summary of what we've been talking about. It's all at spacemakers.au/S2 for season 2. We would encourage you to sign up at spacemakers.au/S2, and there's a handout that you can print up and use if you want to use kind of a set and forget framework.
Like a template, which I reckon is a great idea. Yeah.
So Matt, any last thoughts? If you had anything to recommend to people about friendship, let's say in the midlife squeeze, what would you say?
I'd say I think this idea goes really well with the stuff that we talked about with the happiness curve, the U-shaped curve of happiness. And particularly with the midlife squeeze, we talked about that idea of a good life in the second half of life involving that idea of being generative. That is, being invested in people and causes bigger than myself. Okay. I think that ties really nicely with what it means to be a good friend in the midlife squeeze. Who you're like. You're someone who's interested and invested and taking notice and attending and caring for other people. It's no longer just about you. What am I getting out of this friendship? It's more, what kind of friend can I be?
Yeah, so while it might be easier to build friendships when you're younger, and while it can be harder when you're older, the key is to be less selfish and to be there for others and to walk with people through hard times and to, I suppose, like you said, generative.
Yeah.
You're thinking about others and not yourself. And ironically, that's how you end up with friendships that last the distance, where you become happier and healthier and live a longer life because you're not approaching friendships from a selfish perspective, but you're thinking about it from their perspective.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So maybe another way to say it is that in the latter half of life, it's more about being a real friend and not a deal friend.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah, so I'm going to try to be a real friend and not a deal friend to you.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, nice. All right, so next week we are going to talk about health. We're going to enter the realm of health and how that changes in your 40s and 50s compared to 20s and 30s. I get to put on my physiotherapy hat, which I haven't put on for a long time, and talk about my experiences of health.
Yeah, and you can take the guy to physiotherapy. You can't take physiotherapy out of the guy. Stop slouching, Matt.
That's right. We're going to talk about how to exercise smarter, not harder. And we're going to talk about how fitness goals change as you get older in order to stay the distance. So I'm looking forward to that episode, and until next time, make space.
Make space. Thanks, everyone.